Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Furtwängler, the Decca legacy. Thank God it was a short legacy. This can't be short enough. Based on what this stuff sounds like, holy mackerel. It's just, oh, my dear. Okay, now look. We know that Furtwängler was the sloppiest, most hapless mess of a great conductor that ever lived, because he was a great conductor. There's no question about that. He always had a great conception. The only question was, could he realize the great conception? More often than not, that answer was no, he couldn't. He just couldn't. He couldn't even come close. Oh, it's such a shame, because sometimes the conception was really wonderful, and anybody can figure out what that is. It really is ironic, I think, to hear people leap to his defense, as Rob Cowan, my colleague, does in this little booklet note here. He writes, wait a minute, you got to just hear this. Rob, I'm sorry, but you really know better. You got to know better. Okay, wait a minute. Here it is. Okay. I recall from years gone by a record evening among friends when I brought along a Furtwängler recording. I think it was a Brahms Symphony, when one respected music critic among us waved away what he heard as being incompetently played. Compare Coriolan if you dare, he said contemptuously. Suddenly and depressingly, his comments made sense until hours later I recovered my true priorities, and pondering the performance I'd heard earlier came to the performance I heard earlier, yes, came to the music having gradually brushed our ears as if out of the ether. It was less a musical than a mystical experience, which is surely what Furtwängler had intended. Bullshit, Rob! Bullshit! The music is enough. The music is always enough. You keep your silly mystical crap. I'll take the music. That's all I want is the music. Plain and simple. Brahms Symphony, the music. Do you have any idea what Brahms would have said if someone had said to him, gee, Brahms, I'm sure that the music wasn't sufficient, but what you really intended, yes, the playing was horrible and the execution was incompetent, but you really wanted a mystical experience, not a musical one, right? Yes, Mr. Brahms? Have you any idea what Brahms would have said to that person? I mean, really? It's just unbelievable, the things that get said about this guy. All right, so what's in here? First, this world's slowest and dullest Coriolan Overture. That's the first thing. It's live, and it has people dying and coughing and choking as the orchestra cannot keep the opening chords together. Bum, bum. Remember that? That's the Coriolan Overture. Of course, sometimes with Furtwängler, it goes bum, bum. Yes, it does. Okay, so that's that. Oh, and these are, by the way, with the Vienna Philharmonic and the London Philharmonic. The London Philharmonic is the Brahms Second Symphony, which comes next. That was recorded in 1948. It's not terrible. I mean, Furtwängler's Brahms was always good in essence, in shape. The problem with it is that, first of all, it's 1948. The sonics are just awful. It's a Kingsway Hall recording, but my God, it sounds lousy. And second of all, it's just the London Philharmonic in 1948 wasn't so hot, and Furtwängler was certainly not an orchestra trainer. He depended on them to know what they were doing at all times. It just dies in all of the slower parts. Furtwängler is, he whips up climaxes like nobody can. And the finale is pretty cool. The finale's terrific. I mean, he always did a really good finale. But what makes you crazy about Furtwängler performances, I think, is that it's not that it all goes to pieces at the big moments. Furtwängler was a very good big moment conductor because he knew where the climaxes were, what the shape of the music was supposed to be, or he had a good vision of what it's supposed to be. The problem is all of the little details along the way that you miss. The very opening theme of the Second Symphony and the horns. I mean, they just don't articulate it. It's like part of the melody isn't there. Or the sound of the cellos when they actually have the tune. Or just the very opening chord of the finale. What's the opening note of the finale? It's bum. That's it. Bum. Right? That's all you have to do is bum. He can't do it. It's blah. Things like that, those little spliced chords, these details along the way that everybody else gets right. The worst conductor in the world gets them right. And it's not mystical to get them wrong. It's not mystical at all. It's just bad. It's just bad technique. That's all it is, nothing more. You can't talk about, they talk about how Furtwängler didn't care about precision. That's nonsense. If he had a choice between doing it together and doing it not together, he would have preferred that it be together. The fact that it wasn't, or that he couldn't get it together, well, that's another issue. But it's not. It's just not. And it just, over time, all of these little things that you should not have to pay attention to, but you wind up paying attention to because they just don't sound right. It's the kind of stuff that makes you crazy. So the Brahms Symphony is not the worst thing on the disc. It's a studio recording, technically, and it's just a dull performance for the most part, at least until the finale where it really wakes up. And I love the way Furtwängler accelerates at the end. And, it's amazing because in the coda, where you have those pauses, those sudden pauses, he nails them. He's going to nail them. It's just everything up to that point. You're sitting on the edge of your seat going, oh, God, are they going to get there? Are they going to get there? So that's Brahms 2 and the Coriolan Overture. The second disc has Schumann's Spring Symphony. Oh, is that a mess? It's just a mess. It's just fast and slow and slow and fast. The opening is just heavy and lifeless, and then it really speeds up for the first subject, and then the second subject, all the tension just drains out of the music again, just Furtwängler slows down, and the scherzo, oh my God, bum 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 bum. Oh, it's just whoa. Oh, it's horrible. There's nothing spring-like about it. And then after that is possibly the worst performance in the history of humanity of the Franck Symphony in D minor. The problem here, and this is entirely Furtwängler, sometimes he didn't have a good conception. This is one of those cases. You think it's going to be quick because the opening slow bit that leads to the allegro was very, very quick, surprisingly quick. Da 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 da. But then you get to the allegro, and it's the same tempo. So it's da 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 da. Da 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 da, and it goes on like that for 18 minutes. Oh my God, it's lethal. And the finale. The finale. The finale. How hard can the finale be? Right? It goes chugga 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 pump pump. Well, you don't hear any chugga chugga. The chugga chuggas are missing. You just hear. Horrible. Just horrible. By any standard, horrible. Totally no excuses. Just bad. Bad, bad, bad. And the last disc, and and these, of course, the studio recordings, which were what, the Franck and the Brahms, I think. Yes, those are the studio recordings, and everything else is live. And the live stuff has people coughing all over the place. And the sound is really, really dim, even dimmer than the studio stuff. Although Franck was several years later, it was like 1953, Musikverein, and it sounds, Decca was doing wonderful recordings in the Musikverein. Why couldn't they do it for Furtwängler? I can imagine if the sound had been really great, and really like clean and clear and lively, that maybe the trudgy, awful tempos, would be, you could compensate for them with some transparency of texture or something or whatever. But no, it's like they also did their worst work for the guy. I mean, either he didn't care, or they didn't care, or they didn't get along, or something was going on there. And then there's the Bruckner 4. Well, the Bruckner 4 is the fabulously awful 1888 Gutmann edition, first of all, that everyone is using. And, Furtwängler was, again, he could be very exciting in Bruckner. I mean, he nails climaxes. He always nails climaxes, more or less, sometimes. But sometimes he just doesn't. And this is a Bruckner 4 where there's a lot of the doesn't. The best part is the scherzo. The first movement is just brutally, brutally dull whenever it's not loud. This, first of all, the recording is so bad that the sound becomes very intangible, and that doesn't carry you through the soft bits. It might be that live some of the tension actually did not quite dissipate, but it does here. And then the slow movement, which is like 18 minutes long, it just goes on forever. It seems to never want to end. And it's painful. It's really painful. The scherzo has the cuts and, all that silliness and rescoring, and especially horrible, the final last hunting gallop thing when it's going and the Schock brothers and Gutmann or whoever it was added fake timpani parts. So it's going it's like the dogs barking at the hunt. It's woof, woof. It's not Bruckner. But Furtwängler himself just makes a mess of like the opening of the finale, that huge unison thing, that big dynamic unison theme. And to hear him try and sculpt and shape his way through it, I mean, it's a caricature. It's just a caricature. And so, the climax, the finale, the very last bars, it gets these glorious moments, but horrible half hours. Remember the joke about Wagner has great moments and terrible half hours? This is Furtwängler. This is Furtwängler. You listen to it for the moments and the mysticism. Oh, don't forget the mysticism. Gotta hear the mysticism. It's just junk. I mean, junk. Bad sounding junk. If Furtwängler's name had not been attached to this farrago of nonsense, nobody would pay attention to it today. Nobody. There's no way. Take his name off of it and go find someone who pretends to care about music and knows these works and play it to him blind and say, gee, do you think that that's mystical? Do you hear the soulfulness behind all the horrible sound and clogged textures and miserable ensemble? Is it just mystically marvelous, or is it just bad? Folks, it's just bad. Plain and simple. Bad. So keep on listening, folks, but to other things. Thank you for joining me. Take care.